Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to challenge a story you've heard your entire life, a story repeated so often that no one ever stops to question it. We are told that Hellen Keller, a woman who was profoundly deaf and blind from infancy, not only learned to communicate at a near miraculous level, but also authored books, letters, essays, and even engaged in physiological debates. We're expected to accept this without ever asking, does any of this actually make any sense? The more closely we look, the more official story begins to fall apart. And that emerges instead is the possibility, no, the likelihood that Hellen Keller was not the independent literary mind that we've been taught to revere, but rather a carefully crafted public symbol, a face for ideas, movements, and agendas created by others who needed a miracle story to legitimize their work. Let's begin with the most basic question. How can someone who cannot see or hear independently access the world deeply enough to write complex books about it? To write, you must first learn a language. To learn a language, you need exposure to it. Sound, words, visuals, reading materials, or interactive dialogue. Hellen Keller had none of those. And we're supposed to believe that she learned all of this through palm reading, palm spelling alone. Single letters pressed into the hand one at a time at a pace too slow to match the speed or complexity of human experience. Think about the sheer volume of information a person absorbs from childhood, conversations overheard, books read, observations made from simply walking through life. Hellen Keller had access to none of that. So how does someone with those limitations suddenly develop the ability to write essays on politics, philosophy, or global affairs? How does someone with no sensory connection to the world describe it with more detail than many adults who experience life fully? The simplest answer is also the one no one wants to say aloud. She didn't. Her writings, her speeches, her letters, they were polished, structured, and filled with nuances that even well-read adults struggle to express. Yet we're supposed to accept that they came from someone who, by all records, never had the independent means of verifying anything she was told, shown, or taught. Everything she knew had to be filtered through the minds and hands of her interpreters, primarily Anne Sullivan, and later other instructors, companions, and political advocates. This leads to the second issue, the motivations of the people surrounding her. Hellen Keller became a national symbol, proof that certain educational methods worked, proof that particular social movements were righteous, proof that human potential was limitless when properly guided. But who benefited from that proof? Certainly not Hellen herself, who had no say in how she was publicly presented. Instead, organizations, activists, and educators used her story to raise money, push policies, and attract attention. When you look at her life through this lens, she appears less like an autonomous author and more like a brand, a mascot, a human logo for the causes and careers of the people controlling her narrative. Consider the lack of independent verification. Every word attributed to Hellen Keller had to pass through translators. Every letter she wrote had to be typed by someone else. Every speech she gave had to be spoken by somebody else. At no point in her life did she produce anything that bypassed her handlers. We never see her write a book with her own hand in a way that the public could verify. We never see her debate without someone else interpreting, filtering, and shaping her words. And here's a final point. The myth has been protected too fiercely. Questioning Hellen Keller is treated as taboo. But why? If the story were airtight, asking questions wouldn't threaten it. Yet institutions lean heavily on emotion, nostalgia, and hero worship to avoid scrutiny. That alone should make us pause. Maybe because the story we've been told isn't meant to inspire us. Maybe it's meant to distract us from the people who are really writing the books, shaping the messages, and using Hellen Keller as the perfect, unchallengeable spokesperson. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not asking you to walk away today believing that Hellen Keller was a fraud or that her story was fabricated entirely. What I am asking is for you to look at the inconsistencies, to examine the gaps, and to question what you've been told rather than accepting it blindly. If we can question everything else in history, politics, wars, leaders, events, why should this story be off limits? Why can't we admit that sometimes the legends we cherish most are the ones that deserve the most scrutiny? In the end, the truth isn't offensive. The truth isn't disrespectful. The truth simply is, and we owe it to ourselves to search for it, even when it hides behind the most inspirational myths. Thank you.